Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hunting for Silver Linings. Today is Thursday, March 11. I am sitting here, the chapter director of Grand Rapids, Michigan, in the Great Lakes region of the U.S. And we'll see if my colleague Yorgo Katsanos joins us. He's down in Ohio on his road show for Beneventure Partners. And today we're joined by, now, Sai, how do I pronounce your last name?
Minion, like the little yellow guys.
We have Sai Minion joining us from Indiana. And he wears a lot of hats, and really excited to get his input on the state of entrepreneurship in his area, and ecosystem building. So, Sai, welcome. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So, now, first, before we reached out to you, did you even know that Startup Grind existed?
I did actually. So part of my background story, and I can go into that a little bit if you'd like, is I lived in Austin, and one of my good friends was actually a chapter director there named Damon Clinkscales.
Oh, very good. Cool. Sweet. Yeah. And that's an exciting ecosystem down there. We had on Professor Art Markman from the University of Texas, Austin, on the program, and with the IC Squared Institute and what they are doing to actually foster the growth of the emerging markets around the planet. So really, really interesting talk with him. But yeah, deeply interested in your background. So if you can give us sort of like your story.
Sure, absolutely. So actually very similar to your background. So I grew up in Bloomington, Indiana, and then I left for 20 years. So over the course of those 20 years, we lived in Austin, Seattle, and the Bay. Redwood City, actually. So that was another Startup Grind connection. I wasn't doing anything with them there, but that's where the national convention or whatever you call it is. So in that time, the majority of that was Austin, Texas, and always an entrepreneur since probably sixth grade, I guess. It was probably my first startup. And then, so in kind of reverse order, my last startup was in ed tech, a company called Prep Flash. We would automatically create flashcards from any content using NLP and AI. And Intel Capital invested in that one, and they had an education technology accelerator, which was actually in Redwood City at GSV Labs, which is what brought us to the Bay. Before that, was a company called Cloud Choreo, which used to be really hard to explain at the time because nobody knew what DevOps was, but it's a little easier to explain now. It's essentially a low-code or no-code version for cloud configuration management. Microsoft invested in that one, and we had an accelerator that we went through for that. So that's what moved us to Seattle, and we ended up selling that to VMware about 5 years ago. And then before that was construction management. My wife and I have always flipped houses, through all of my other startup stuff. And one of our biggest business problems was we had paper timesheets. So, on Friday, you'd get a handwritten timesheet that said 8:30, 9 o'clock. Nobody ever clocked in at 8:13, and they weren't rounding in our favor. So we created an app so they could clock in from the job site. And this was before smartphones were ubiquitous. So we actually we used an IVR, and you had to call an 800 number and we would triangulate their location. So now I could say, Corey's in Grand Rapids, he's at this address, and he's in this side of the building.
Right.
At that time, you couldn't do that. But I could say, you're within 1,000 yards of the job site, which was good enough for our purposes.
Good enough. I'll start paying.
Yeah, exactly. And a whole bunch of failures in there too. So it's not, that's just the highlight reel. So I've started way more than have become successful for sure. So.
Well, sure. I mean, if we're going to end there, your role as a mentor in a lot of different organizations and for a lot of different founders from all different walks of life, and as a professor of entrepreneurship, can you, how about we talk about failure for a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. I'm good at that one, I guess. When I do mentorship now, which I do for a few accelerators as well as with my day job, tell them, it's like you learn a lot more from the failures than you do from the successes. I've probably made every mistake you're about to anyway. So you might as well ask before you make a decision, because they could probably at least point you in the right direction, or say, hey, this didn't work for me, so just don't do it that way. Do it some other way. I still haven't done it correctly yet, but avoid this. So it's helped to be able to speak to experience, and people tend to listen a little more when you go, hey, had I done it this way, I would have made an extra $500,000 on that deal, or I would have got customers earlier, or whatever the case may be. So.
Yeah. So can you tell us about a particular failure of yours that you're like really proud of?
I get asked that question a lot.
Yeah.
And the one I like to talk about, even though it's not technically, I was part of it, but it wasn't my startup. There was a company that was actually incubated out of Kleiner Perkins, if you're familiar with them, out of the Bay. This was about the internet bubble, like right before it bursts. It was a company called Broadband Office, and we went through $750 million in 18 months.
That's quite the burn.
Yeah, it was fun. So, no.
Right. So what's the lesson there out of that one for you?
Doing market research, a little more diligence around that. If the rain gets to be too loud, I don't know if you can even hear that, but my gosh, it's like absolutely pouring here. So what they were doing was this was back in the day when it was kind of hard to get an internet access in your commercial building. So if you wanted a T1, which now seems quaint that's even a thing you could sell, that was $1,000 to $1,500 a month to get a T1, which you can get on a cable modem no problem these days, and 100 times faster than that. But it would take you a couple months to actually get that wired to your office. So the idea was an application service provider, which is kind of a precursor to SaaS software. So the idea was we would get you wired, and then we would sell you applications over that bandwidth. So it was kind of a loss leader. But in order to do that, you had to wire the buildings that you were going to sell into. And they went and wired everything and anything they could, and at a tune of millions of dollars per building, and some of them had tenants in there that had zero interest in internet access. So today you would go and just knock on doors and say, hey, if we wire this building, is this something you would buy?
Right.
Which seems so elementary now, but we just didn't do that in 98 or 99 when the year was. So definitely, going out and talking to customers and making sure that somebody's going to buy it before you actually build it.
Yeah, I think that's something that we're hearing a lot, like maybe a renewed and deeper focus on that, especially as customers have shifted, like this last year. Some businesses have seen their customers just plain old disappear because their company or offering is no longer relevant in a pandemic planet or even a post-pandemic planet. So that's been very interesting. And since we're there, like, do you have any entrepreneurs in your flock that you can brag about that maybe have had some really great pivots this last year?
I think the ones that have done well went into it with eyes wide open on what they were doing, that embraced it right away. I don't know if it's just because I'm in a college town or what, but the ones that tended to do better were the younger entrepreneurs that just accepted it, right away. It was, hey, we now live in a different world. I need to build something for the world I live in now, not where I think it's going to be or where it was, 5 years ago. Some of the older entrepreneurs now are still thinking, okay, well, things are just going to go back to normal eventually. Well, what's normal, right? It's is it ever going to be what it was before the pandemic? I don't think so.
Right. Yeah, we had a really good conversation with a chapter director of ours in Israel, and pretty soon we're going to have a talk with an author of an upcoming book, which is really getting at the DNA of why Israel's ecosystem is so dynamic and hot. Like, how did you do that in 10 years? And specifically, he says, well, we live from birth like in a state of crisis, like the unpredictability of our lives. And so, seeing a pandemic response like Israel's and the vaccination, he's like, I'm not surprised. And so like why the rest of the world is a mystery. So
yeah, and that makes so much sense. And sometimes in hindsight, you need to see that, but
yeah,
that's great.
Well, he also spoke about the importance of like social capital, which I think the youth today are really leaning into, and they get the benefit of large digital networks that us older folks, we didn't have the benefit of starting a long time ago. We a lot of us were late adopters even to LinkedIn, so. And you're someone who certainly has like a deep like and broad social like network when it comes to being able to affect change in organizations, right? Because of all the work that you've been doing and the people that you've interfaced. So when we talk about like the idea of social capital, like where does that rank when you are working with your entrepreneurs or students?
It's hugely important. So I take my own personal social capital very seriously. I'll even the mentees that I get assigned for, say, an accelerator, they'll give me a giant list of, hey, I want to go talk to these VCs, and you're like, well, that's great. Why those? Let's start there. And I don't just send them introductions to the 20 people that they asked for. Let's start with 2, and then I'll get their feedback, you get their feedback. Let's shift some things to see what it is that you're trying to accomplish, and then kind of go from there. So where you don't want that to be a bad relationship on either side. I don't want to send a bunch of entrepreneurs that aren't ready to a friend that's a venture capitalist, but I also don't want to do the opposite either. I don't want to send an entrepreneur to, say, an angel investor that doesn't understand this person's market. It doesn't help anybody. It's hard enough to make recommendations. It's kind of a thankless thing. It's if it goes well, whoever you recommended gets the credit. If it goes poorly, you get the blame. So you have to be very careful about that social capital and making sure that the things that you're offering are beneficial to both sides, which is hugely important. And you'll start to see that, and I'm sure you have in your same ecosystem, where the people that just want to help are the people that really do help, and then the people that get helped by that person, now they want to help. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes this giant feedback loop, and you get more and more people that are buying into the ecosystem because they want to help each other.
Yeah, it's give then get, right? And then go far and together. Yeah. So all of those fun things. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and also recognizing that that your stock, right? The value of your personal social capital stock only increases by the value that you create, right? You have to kind of like mine it like coins. And it's not, it has to be deliberate. And that's why, we really specialize, on the fact of making introductions or making networking fun and relationship building. Transactional networking sucks. Like, I don't need to buy a house. I don't need a haircut. Like, it's like, so we don't, like, those kinds of networking environments are kind of, they're tough. Anyway, yeah. So, so you've returned back home. Is the story there. And what was the difference between when you left and then 20 years later when you returned? Because as a as a transplant myself and returned citizen, I'm
Mhm.
interested to hear that story.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I left, part of that was there wasn't really an ecosystem that I knew about. There were disparate things that were going on. Come to find out, in hindsight, but we didn't all collaborate together because we didn't know each other existed. In those days, it was you would ask, hey, what do you do? And I would say entrepreneur. And literally over 50% of the time, the response was, so you're unemployed. You're like, whoa, wait a minute. Like that's not what I'm trying to get across here. Like I have a business, it makes money, probably less money than I could make if I went and got a job. And definitely I work more hours than if I got a 9 to 5. But it's a job, right? But they just thought, oh my gosh, you're just unemployed. Like what does that mean? So when I came back, it actually was for a job, which I never really actually thought I would ever say that I have a job, like as in somebody gives me health insurance that I didn't pay for myself. And I signed the back of a paycheck, not the front.
Yeah.
So it was to work for Elevate Ventures, which is a venture capital firm. But it's technically a VDO, so a venture development organization. And the difference being we kind of take a hybrid approach. So on one side is just traditional venture capital. We go find entrepreneurs, we give them money, they give us equity. But then on the other side, they have a development piece and they hire EIRs, so entrepreneur in residence. And we partner with specific counties within Indiana. So my region is called Velocities, and it's Bartholomew County, specifically the Chamber of Commerce there put up $500,000. And then on Bloomington side, it's Monroe County, specifically the Dimension Mill, which is a co-working space, put up another $500,000, and then Elevate matched that with $1.5 million to create a $2.5 million partnership for 3 years. And all of that money gets spent on investments and events and my salary, that kind of thing, over the course of 3 years to increase entrepreneurship and innovation in South Central Indiana.
And is the target for that to live on beyond the initial vision and scope?
Absolutely. So there's different partnerships throughout Indiana. Mine being one of the newer ones, but the other ones have already been multiple 3-year terms. They just, you got to put a line in the sand and say, things change. Maybe, we actually haven't had any of those go away. So they just keep renewing. But the potential is there that, okay, we're going to do something different or what. But I would argue we're actually adding enough value that there's, of course they're going to want to renew. So.
Yeah, so we were just having a conversation with the Princeton chapter director because their state is not really doing the best job of tracking the success of these programs, especially through the entire life cycle of the ventures that are born from their efforts. So is Indiana doing the tracking? Do you track follow-on funding and how many employees, the demographics, board makeup, all that fun stuff?
Absolutely, and great question, because you don't, that's one of the biggest things I think you get when you put in any program, whether it's, a startup grind or whether it's, a venture development organization or whether it's even a venture capital is, hey, we're putting all of these public or private dollars into this program. What do you consider success? Is that an exit? Is that investing in companies? Is that creating jobs? Economic development in general is changing, but at the core, you still want high-paying, high-growth jobs in your region. That's what it comes down to. And the vehicle to do that may change. So for us, it's creating startups or helping others create startups or helping them level up. But we track all of it. So I actually have a quarterly report and I have a board myself, And then Elevate also has a board. So we go through all of those KPIs at least once a month, and then a bigger thing once a quarter, and then an even bigger annual report that's, bound and actual hard copy mailed to any of the stakeholders in the regions.
Yeah. So, and one of the reasons why the Princeton, his name is David Stengel. He's doing something really cool. I'm gonna send you his name after we get done talking. His particular startup is called Board Plus Plus. He brings balance and diversity to boards, like startup boards, and he does so by leveraging the talent that's within organizations like Ford Motor Company that need to bring experience to those positions, to people in the mid-level management. And sitting on boards is the best way to get past that concrete ceiling, bamboo ceiling, glass ceiling, the glass cliff, all those fun things, right? Yeah. So anyway, that's a really fun thing that he's working on in the startup space. But he asked me that specific question about metrics and KPIs for growing ecosystems, because I just spat out like, yeah, we found in 2019 that Michigan has a $4.5 billion deficit in follow-on funding rounds. And so when I see a stat like that for Startup Grind, I'm like, great. So what I need to do is I need to make our ecosystem known around the world, right? And so so I can bring that cash in. What we know about ecosystems is that they're not completely 100% self-sustaining, right? So do you have particular problems or opportunities that you're looking to solve for right now?
You can always get more startups, making people aware that you can start a startup from anywhere. And especially now, that's, back to our earlier conversation, the pandemic has really opened that up, where you're no longer geographically bound. You can live wherever you want. So you can have a job in New York and live in Bloomington, Indiana. You can, do software development wherever. So it as well, it works the other way too. It's actually, I've am mentor for 3 different accelerators, and not one of them's in Indiana. We have some smaller ones that I do here too, but they're all over the place. And I would recommend that people do that for that exact reason that you mentioned with the board, which please do send me that. I would recommend other people learn from other accelerators and other startups, and even the ones that I went through. I think I learned more from the folks that I was going through it with than the actual programming. So.
Well, I do feel a little bad for folks that they don't have the benefit of having to immerse oneself in a new area or culture. So like to understand the deep difference between a Seattle and the Bay Area, because like culturally they're different places.
Absolutely.
And also both good food towns. So I'm a little jealous that you had such experience. So now since we have JR here, and JR is an entrepreneur that you're working with?
Correct.
Okay, cool. JR, do you mind giving a quick 60-second pitch of what you're working on with Townie?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. My name's JR. Actually, I graduated from IU about 6 years ago and started a juice bar here called In Bloom, put on Indiana Bloomington. And so yeah, we've kind of had some struggles and trial and errors trying to market ourselves in a college town. And with that, we actually decided to build our own platform that centered around some campaigns we ran in Bloom, where we take a small group of micro influencers in your community and encourage them to spread smaller discounts. So basically deals that aren't going to put you out of business. So not kind of different than the Groupon approach. And then, yeah, so we took that mindset and that approach, and we're trying to grow it here in Bloomington. And then from there, expand it to other college towns. And in the meantime, just keep in mind that our goal is to connect small businesses with their current customers and their advocates in their community. So that's Townie, quick synopsis.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And so, Sai, what's it like for an entrepreneur like JR to one find you and get in the program and have a seat?
Sure. So it's actually a fairly tight-knit community. We work out of the same co-working space. So if you come through here, most likely somebody's going to say, "Hey, you should meet Sai." I have no vested interest in it, monetarily. I want to invest in companies. And I do angel invest, but I can only angel invest in the other 49 states because it's a conflict of interest if I invest personal money in Indiana. So pretty much anybody doing anything entrepreneurial in this region, I'll get to talk to them at some point in time.
That's cool. And so, what are some of the more common, issues that affect your particular like ecosystem? Sometimes it's like mindset stuff that's generational. Sometimes it's fixing like that early on funding gap or approach. Like, what are you solving a lot?
It's different for everybody. So the way I usually describe, most people would say, well, lack of capital. All right. Anybody that's in an ecosystem that isn't thriving, they'll immediately say, well, there's just not enough money here. And I would argue that's probably never the case, if not close to never. So in all of those other cities that I've lived in, there's a whole lot more entrepreneurs that are investable or investor ready than there are people ready to write checks. And in Indiana, it's the exact opposite. So if a 10 is a slam dunk investable company, I run into a lot of 6s and 7s. And why they're not a 10 is different for every one of them.
Sure.
Some of them need help finding product market fit. Some are trying to build something specifically for this town versus anywhere. Some of them just need connections or help with their pitch deck, or so it really depends on each one of them. So I like to meet with them and just tell me what you're working on, and then I don't know all the answers. I ask a lot of questions though, and that makes them kind of reevaluate what they're working on. Like, oh, I never thought of it like that. I still don't give them the answer because I don't know the answer,
Right.
but I can point out the holes, and then you fulfill them.
Yeah, we just had a really great conversation yesterday with an entrepreneur and investor who does like the hybrid approach, but specifically within his own fund. And he spends a lot of time on helping people like identify how to think. Because and also to your point, the best investor is your customer, right? Like that's the best way to raise money is from like an actual going concern. And also recognizing that most companies don't ever raise and don't need to, right?
Yep.
Sometimes it's like a shiny distraction. So is Indiana interested in, or even more specifically Bloomington, are you interested in importing entrepreneurs then? Like, is that part of what you're doing?
It really is. So kind of what I mentioned before, economic development is changing as a whole. And we work with all of those folks because we're all aligned. It's not, the money's not coming out of the same bucket, but we all want the same thing. We want more startups, we want more companies. And back in the day, that was, okay, well, let's move this huge factory to our town, which is a whole bunch of jobs, but then those are offset with tax credits. I would rather create a whole new company and let them grow, which is giving, it's fewer at a time, but the potential for them to be high paying jobs, which elevates the whole economy is more likely.
And it makes a more resilient economy as well, because the whole factory isn't going to get squashed.
Yeah, exactly. Like if one goes away, then now what, right?
And when we talk about things like equity, gender equity, et cetera, racial equity, justice, social justice, these things can be moved a lot faster when we're doing them in the small little increments and building better systems that way, rather than try to like steer that factory and then the company that owns it in Germany like to do better by us. So, not saying that German companies, conglomerates are bad.
Yeah.
Just saying,
Point taken, right?
yeah, right. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your work specifically in mentoring women. We're in Women's History Month right now. We just had International Women's Day. This last year, globally, the topic of equity is top of mind, and now it's meaning more and more for companies not to just signal, but do better. So the work that you're doing, like maybe a little bit of why, and
Sure.
whatever your thoughts are.
Sure. So a few things around that. One of the accelerators that I mentor for is called the Ally Accelerator, which is it's a partnership between Woman 2.0 and Playbook LLC, which is a venture capital firm, and it's all Black and Latinx women founders. So really kind of getting a different perspective. I think every one of us, regardless of who you are, has some blind spots. And I like to expose myself to different founders because it opens my eyes to different things. Like, oh, I never even thought about it that way. Or just like how I ask questions of the startups that I work with, I ask questions the other way around. Like, well, how is this different? And when I hear some of them say, when you're in the room, I get the meeting, and when you're not, I don't. And that, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but that makes me sick to my stomach that it has anything to do with that. So I go out of my way to help as many people as I can from as many different diverse backgrounds, whether that's ethnicity, whether they're trans, whatever the case may be. I try to help as many people as I can from as many different backgrounds as I can.
Yeah, it's the topic of allyship is not quite as on fire as it could be, should be, and hopefully will be. Because it's a delicate balance of not just putting yourself into a situation, but taking yourself out of situations, especially as for me, a 45-year-old white cisgen, entrepreneur. Sometimes it's really important that I'm not in the room, because if I am, my mere presence centers whiteness.
Yeah.
And so I don't and I think a few years ago that really shocked me. Like what? I don't belong anywhere I want to. So definitely a lot of work internally on recognizing where I do and do not belong. Right.
Yeah.
So
agree. And going into that accelerator, I said that exact same to the woman that runs it. And I said, I would absolutely love to help, but also know that I'm the proverbial old white guy that has gray hair, and she said, no, it's an Ally Accelerator for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And, you're assigned a mentee and just help them as much as you can. Perfect. Yeah. I'll do that every time.
We had a Mike Ducker on. He's built ecosystems and done a lot of work for USAID as well as the World Bank. And some of the studies that they've shown is back to the social capital aspect for an ecosystem. It's the number one way to help build ecosystems, and that mentoring piece is the second part of that social capital thing. And it's more about empowering, right? It's not about training. It's not about a simple, quick connection, but it's elevating, empowering, and not just opening doors, right? But walking through them together and stuff like that. Do you have can you give a couple words of advice for folks that might want to step up and be allies or mentors?
Just put yourself out there. The more that you open those doors, the more doors that get opened, but also be careful about protecting your own time because it can very easily spiral out. If you hear all those dingings in the background, that's from all the different Slack channels that I'm on, and I'm trying to close them as we talk. But so be careful of that part of it. But literally, if everybody has a background that can help. So whatever you're good at, find people that need that, and just go help them.
And do you think it's that it's ever too early of a time to get into the mentorship game?
No, I don't think so. I think, like I said, we all have different experiences. Even if you've had a 9-to-5 your whole life, maybe you're a domain expert in whatever field you're in. There's probably a startup that's trying to disrupt that industry. Go help them.
Yeah. And then I also, one of the first things that I like to do when bringing on like a mentee is I help them find someone to mentor. it's like the, and that certainly sometimes brings out that imposter syndrome. They're like what do I have? Like, you have everything. Like,
Yeah.
just, well, let's do it. So
Yeah. I would argue if they had the wherewithal to come and find you, they are relatively intelligent and can give value to somebody else, right?
Right, exactly. So maybe back to JR. JR, what's the problem you're working on with your organization right now that you're digging into?
Honestly, we're still in an early stage, and so I don't know if it's necessarily a problem, but this is why I join calls like this, because I consider Sai a mentor, whether he knows it or not. And I would say just really just trying to immerse myself in the startup community. And, I've been in the restaurant industry for 7 years now. And, I always say this for reference, but I have a mindset of making sure we have enough bananas in the store, and so just to kind of switch mindsets and try to now think like somebody who's in the tech industry, and not just, sometimes I get a little stuck in my own business as well as a restaurant owner. And so that's why one of the problems we had early on was you guys talked about trying to solve a problem before you even know if it's really a problem, right? And so rather than building, we spent probably 6 months trying to build something that before we really did our research. And so I kind of took a step back and went and talked to as many different business owners at least in Bloomington, as I could. And so I guess, yeah, to answer your question, that was our problem, was trying to guess what the problem was before we really knew what it was. And so, yeah, now we kind of took a step back, like I said, and I went back to talking to business owners, trying to meet people like Sai and other mentors. And so, yeah, trying to work too quickly.
How do we learn about what you're working on? What's the website address?
Yeah, it's Towney, TOWNEE, so kind of a different spelling for Towney, app.com. So
Towneyapp.com?
Yeah, and we're launching at the end of this month as well with our beta app, and we have about 10 different businesses on right now. And so, yeah, it's only for Bloomington, Indiana, but we're hoping to maybe Grand Rapids is the next spot.
Sure. Congratulations. That's really awesome. That's really
thank you.
And it's not an easy journey, but I love working with hospitality professionals, specifically restaurateurs or people from like restaurant business, because they're used to fires burning all the time. And sometimes they're not the best at prioritizing the fires, or they have favorite fires to always dig into. But it's some, I don't know, I've found it to be kind of true that hospitality professionals can usually find some success in almost anything they try, but it's not always the other way around. Because like the tea, a lot of people are just so like focused, like they put them in a restaurant and they're like, well, I don't know. Anyway, So we just have a couple minutes left, but Sai, I want to ask you, what can Startup Grind chapter directors here in the U.S. or your region or globally do for you and Elevate?
Really, pointing us towards any of the Midwest startups that we could help, even more specifically in Indiana. We can definitely do with that. And if I was to challenge any of them to do something now with the pandemic, like I said, you're not geographically bound. I would recommend volunteering somewhere else. You're going to expand your own. I believe in the learn it all, not know it all mentality. So I love to learn from new people, and with that network of folks, why not volunteer somewhere else? At somebody else's accelerator, or talking to somebody else, or so I absolutely love what you're doing by talking to each of the ecosystems, because we all have different things to add, and we have such unique roles. That it's not like you can just ask somebody down the street, oh, you've done this before. What would it's not that easy. There's not a whole lot of us weirdos that do what we do. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, cool. I'll keep that in mind. I have a few names that I'll send this conversation to already, and then I'm really just so grateful for the generosity of your time and insights. A real pleasure to make your acquaintance. And JR, thank you so much for joining. Really, really love learning about what you're working on. Best of luck. And I'm if you put a spot on your if you have like an email list to keep people updated, I want to be on it. Okay.
Deal.
All right. Cool.
Great to meet you.
Bye, JR. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.